Welcome to Theory of Flight, AERO 1020. In this video presentation, we'll review aircraft vocabulary, and we'll go over aircraft category and aircraft class. We'll handle introductions and review the syllabus during our regular class time.
Here is my contact information with my office phone number, my email address, and my office is in the Business and Aerospace building on the south side, room S222, which is right across from the aerospace office. Just a little bit of information about my background. I have almost 7,000 hours of total flight time, and of that 6,000 hours is in dual given instruction. I've instructed in several different aircraft, starting with the Cessna 172 Skyhawk, a Diamond DA-20 Katana, the Piper Seminole PA-44, which is a multi-engine trainer, the Piper Cherokee PA-28, Piper AERO PA-28R, which is a complex aircraft, and the Cirrus SR-20 and SR-22, both technically advanced aircraft. I also have experience flying the turboprop King Air 90 and 200 in charter operations as well as a skydive pilot. My last position was at Embry-Riddle Aeronautical University as a training manager in their flight department. I was also an adjunct professor. I have experience as an airport manager, an FBO owner. FBO is a fixed-based operator, and a Part 61 flight school owner. My flight school was a Cirrus training center, and I was a CSIP or a Cirrus standardized instructor pilot. In the theory of flight, AERO 1020, we'll discuss how airplanes fly. We'll discuss the physics involved, the mathematics involved, and the science of flight. The standing joke in aviation is that magic makes an airplane fly. Some magic going on with the engines, some magic, very important magic going on with the wings, and some more magic going on the tail section, or what we call the empennage. But how does an airplane really fly? So what really makes an airplane fly? What do you think? There's a lot of science going on, a lot of mathematics going on, but in the end, what really makes an airplane fly is money. It takes fuel for an airplane to fly. If you don't own an airplane, you have to rent an airplane. So there's a lot of money involved, and that's something that you will learn as a pilot. Before we move on, we need to discuss some aviation terminology, beginning with the parts of the airplane. And here's a figure that you'll become familiar with before the end of this class, showing an aircraft, in this case it's a transport aircraft, with the different parts of the aircraft labeled. As you can see, the fuselage of the aircraft is actually just the body of the aircraft. And then starting with the tail section, which is called the empennage, we see the horizontal stabilizer, the vertical stabilizer, and on the horizontal stabilizer, on the trailing edge, or in the aft or back section of the stabilizer, we have elevators. On the aft section of the vertical stabilizer, we have what's called a rudder. And then we have the wings, and on the wings we have flaps, and we have ailerons. In this case, because we have a picture of a transport aircraft, we also have spoilers and slats attached to the wings. Under the wings we have the engines, and in the forward section of the fuselage we have the cockpit, also known as a flight deck. Here's another airplane, probably more representative of the airplanes that you'll be flying at the beginning of your aviation career. This is perhaps a Cessna 172 Skyhawk, And it has all the same parts as the transport aircraft that we looked at before, with the exception of the propeller on the front part of the fuselage. We'll also learn about aircraft categories and classes. It's important to remember that category and class differs when we're talking about airman certification versus aircraft certification. Aircraft categories, as it applies to airman certification, include airplane, rotorcraft, powered lift, glider, lighter than air, powered parachute, and weight shift control. Within the airplane category, you have classes including single engine land, or single engine sea, and multi-engine land, multi-engine sea. Now, because these categories and classes apply to airman certification, they will appear on your private pilot certificate. So, if you do your training in a Diamond DA-40, which is an airplane single-engine land, then that will show up on your private pilot certificate. When you get your multi-engine rating, you'll also see multi-engine land on your private pilot certificate. Rotorcraft include both helicopters and gyroplanes. There's no separate classes for powered lift or glider category aircraft, but for lighter than air, we have either an airship class or a balloon class. And then powered parachute, again, doesn't have separate classes, but a weight shift control aircraft can either be a land or sea class. In this slide, you can see some examples of lighter than air aircraft, powered lift aircraft, a glider, and also an airplane multi-engine sea. The lighter than air aircraft pictured in this slide is a airship, or what is also known as a blimp or a dirigible. The powered lift aircraft is an Osprey, military aircraft that can take off vertically. And then in the lower left-hand picture you see a glider, a pretty standard glider, and on the lower right-hand side, airplane that is actually a seaplane with more than one engine, so it's an airplane multi-engine sea. In this slide we have a rotorcraft helicopter class, and we also have an airplane single-engine land. The other class in the lighter than air category is a balloon, and you can see we have a hot air balloon pictured on the left side here. And also remember, even though we may not think of them like we do a small airplane, large transport aircraft pictured on the right hand side of the slide are still airplane multi-engine land aircraft. On the left-hand side of this slide you see pictured a weight shift category aircraft, and that's also known as an ultralight, and the aircraft is actually steered by shifting your weight in the aircraft. On the right side you see a powered parachute. The parachute's the same type of parachute used by skydivers. The difference is that in the powered parachute we have an engine. In this slide you see a couple of different classes of rotorcraft. On the left side is a gyroplane, and on the right side you see what is known as a gyrodyne. A gyroplane includes a rotor at the top of the fuselage of the aircraft that spins, but it's not powered by an engine. As you can see on the rear of the aircraft there's a pusher prop. That prop is actually powered by the engine and propels the gyroplane forward. As the gyroplane moves forward, the rotor at the top of the aircraft begins to spin, creating lift. On the right side is a gyrodyne. And the difference between the gyroplane and the gyrodyne is the gyrodyne's rotor at the top is actually powered by an engine. And then finally we have the airplane category, and remember we're talking now about airman certification rather than aircraft certification. So the category of these aircraft is airplane, and on the left you have a Diamond DA-40, which is an airplane single engine land. On the right we have a Piper Seminole. That is an airplane multi-engine land. So here we have a little knowledge check. What do we have on the left side? It's a Piper PA-28R or AERO. That would be an airplane single engine land. In the center, it looks like we have a glider. And on the right, we have a rotorcraft helicopter. Rotorcraft being the category, helicopter being the class. Some other very important terms that we'll be using frequently in this class concern the different axes of movement around the aircraft. The three axes of movement around the aircraft are the longitudinal axis, which is from the nose back to the tail, the lateral axis, which is from wingtip to wingtip, and then the vertical axis, which is straight up and down vertically through the center of the aircraft. In this graphic, you see that it's called the normal axis, but in this class we'll refer to it as the vertical axis. Since an aircraft moves in 3 dimensions, it's important for us to understand each of these axes of movement and what actually controls the movement around these different axes. It's also important for us to know what each of these movements is called. Movement around the longitudinal axis, or the straight line from the nose to the tail, is called roll, R-O-L-L. Movement around the lateral axis from wingtip to wingtip is called pitch, and movement around the vertical axis is called yaw, Y-A-W. Another important term is relative wind. Relative wind is simply the direction of the wind as it hits the aircraft as the aircraft flies through the air. Now we'll learn more about the airfoil and the different terms describing the airfoil. One term is called the chord line. As you can see, the chord line is a straight line from the front of the airfoil back to the rear, also known as the leading edge back to the trailing edge. The angle between the chord line and the relative wind is called the angle of attack. And finally we have the 4 forces that act on the airplane. We'll be discussing each one of these forces separately during class. They include lift, which opposes weight, and in some cases we will discuss weight as gravity. And then we have thrust, which is produced by the power plant of the airplane, opposing drag. When each one of these forces is in equilibrium, the airplane is in straight, unaccelerated flight. So in other words, when thrust equals drag and lift equals weight, the airplane is flying straight and level and is not accelerating, is not slowing down. If lift is greater than weight, then the airplane is climbing. If lift is less than weight, the airplane is descending. And if thrust is greater than drag, the airplane is accelerating. And if thrust is less than drag, the airplane is decelerating. So that concludes our first presentation on the theory of flight, AERO 1020. If you have any questions, please feel free to contact me. In our next presentation, we'll continue with our discussion about aircraft vocabulary.